I'm Dylan Hunt, Team ARG. This is Colin, other guy,
Yeah, yeah.
also on Team ARG. Mike Rance is apparently never gonna spawn, so it's just us two. We're flying solo, but we're the Night Owls apparently, so that's us.
Yeah,
And today we're gonna talk about the new ban list.
yeah. So this was obviously came out pre-release event like it always does. Although I feel like it usually comes out closer. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I feel like it usually comes at the week of the pre, like the day of or whatever, right?
Yeah,
Not like a
like
couple days before. So
the Friday or Saturday. But I mean, I'm
yeah,
not
but
complaining. But
Thursday. So. Yeah, we know it's whatever, right?
yeah. So
So biggest thing, the one everyone's been asking about, and they finally did it, is Distortion of Time. Totally banned, can't play it at all.
which
New Frontiers, of course, you can still play it in Wander, and honestly, I don't think it does anything in Wander. It's there, it does some things, but the power level of Wander is just that much higher that it doesn't really need to be banned in Wander.
yeah.
But New Frontiers, different story.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those scenes where I'm kind of sad that it's gone in a sense of like I liked the mechanic, I like alternate ways of winning the game, but they just it combined with like TSW's free will per turn and a bunch of other factors just like made it.
Well, like, it's a card clearly designed for TSW. At the same time, it feels unfair when specifically used with TSW. So
Yeah,
it's this weird mismatch of, like, it's fair, but not with her, which is the one it was designed for. So it's really bizarre, actually.
yeah. So it's I mean obviously Time Span which will probably still run Mosasaurus because why not for three or whatever
Yeah.
pull out a friggin' beast. Although at least it's funny though because even that now they've introduced cards that make it much easier to deal with that card in Stranger of New Valhalla. So Time Spinning which is either completely under control or just completely out of the meta at this point now because of the cards that were introduced and this being banned
I think it's still
or top
honestly
tier
kind of a
top.
threat. Like, it's not like the upper tier where it was basically like you play green or you play Time Spinning Witch, or you get lucky with Kirik and destroy face.
Or
But
you quick cast
I feel
Hanzo.
like now, yeah, where you play casters instead.
Or,
I feel like it's literally like it's still a good deck. The deck didn't lose anything that's making it good. It just this was the it would always tied the knot. This is what always made it so you win 90% of your games, right? So the deck still has all of its tricks. It just doesn't skip your turn, so you actually get a chance to fight back. So it's now a fair deck, if you will. And with the next ban, I think that actually matters a lot. So we'll probably mention that now. The Spirit Stone, which is what made it so that green decks were always able to fight against basically everything else. Because if you played against discard, you drew a new hand essentially. If you needed like a Lorite or seven Disciples, you just dig through your deck for another three cards, or you can pick up a card and draw two at the same time for literally zero mana because you would tap them and then sack them and they come back standing. So basically, Spirit Stone and Distortion Time both being hit makes things a lot different because now you're hitting two of the major players, and although they're both still really good, it means the other colors and the other decks and the other archetypes, they all get the ability to start playing their stuff, as well as just getting a new set of support for those decks.
yeah, it takes away at least the edge of the oppression method. So like this, you know, like you mentioned, the decks will still be good. They're not, but it's not like oh I have to play that deck if I want a top 8 or top
Yeah,
16. It's now like okay I have a good chance. It's definitely one of the top decks, but I can now much more confidently come in with a rogue deck or one of the lower tier decks that you're really good at piloting, for example. Now and this problem was a little bit with Sherry, where you didn't have to necessarily. You had to be a good pilot of Sherry in order to get top 8 because everyone was playing Sherry, but you didn't have to be a good pilot of Sherry to beat non-Sherry decks. And now it makes it so if you're a good pilot with a lower tier deck, it's much easier now to beat these higher tier decks if they're not being piloted by like a Ryan Miles or something like that, you know. And so taking that edge off, that oppression edge, is extremely helpful. And like he mentioned it in here, and this is something I had said post rotation, which was Spirit Stone was a pretty decent card before. Obviously, people were running it in Sherry and stuff like that before, but post rotation, when in a monocolor format, this card is super good. Like it's such good benefits, and then you combine it like you mentioned with the rune. This card was like badonkadonk good in a monocolor format. In a dual color format, it was okay. But
yeah, the post actually went on to explain that the trade-off in design was not playing a dual stone. So there's a really big trade-off, and you have to make the choice: is not playing a dual stone and potentially opening with 4 green worth doing this? But in this cluster, we don't have dual stones, so there's no trade-off. You just always ran Spirit Stone as a 4-of in every deck if it ran green, and that was the end of the story. And I've had a lot of people, locals and stuff, kind of elaborate on this, like, hey, it would be nice if I could sack my Darkstone and draw 4 cards, just saying, right? There's no drawback at all. It just, if anytime you need a card, you snap your fingers and do it. And even if you don't play Meditation, or you do and you need to do it again, you can still just double dip and get another 2 cards off your Spirit Stones, or 4 cards, or whatever you need at the time, right?
yeah, and even in the dual color format, I remember because I and most people ran these inside of a Sherry deck. Like getting into certain points, you're like, okay, I'll tap Float a Will, banish, draw a card. There's the Lord I want, or whatever card you're trying to get into. It having that draw power before, and especially once you get past turn 3 and stuff, it's not that big of a deal to sack a stone because most stuff you're running is that below 3 cost anyways. Fully paying for big resonators isn't a real thing right now, so sacking stones isn't a big deal post a certain point, or even pre that point if it leads into a big play and stuff like that.
I was personally really against it in my decks that I played, because, for example, when I went to the ARG circuit, sorry, what's the name of the event that we had at the end of the season?
Invitational.
The Invitational, yeah. When we went to that, I played the Lumia deck with the Jupiters, the Prisias, the Jupiter Prisia. I'm trying to think what the last one was. There was another big body, but the whole point of was it with the Verdant City, give them all swiftness, Prisia lands on the field, blows up a doll, attacks, blows up a doll, and a turn blinks with Lumia's ability, blows up another doll. So that's how you get board control, and Jupiter would give you card advantage, draw you cards, recover your cards, and let them attack again, cancel spells, bounce things to hand. Basically, the deck was all high-value swiftness cards, which is great. But in that deck specifically, that trade-off was really relevant, because if I'm playing 3 colors, playing red, I'm playing green, I'm playing yellow, I don't want to see a vanilla green stone for 2 turns, because then I'm just not playing the game, right? Okay. So that's why I think his post was really relevant, because, yeah, Sherry didn't care. Sherry was like, okay, it's whatever. Let's see Dark Stone in the first 4 turns, I'm still probably winning the game, right? Whereas, like, most other decks did actually have that trade-off.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm glad to see. It was something. It's cool to see, just because Spirit Stone was something that there's like talk here and there of like so this should probably banned. Yeah, but like it was never on the forefront, because you're not getting. No one's playing a Spirit Stone to cancel your ability. I mean, indirectly they're banishing to pull a card that can cancel your ability, but even though you're seeing that happen, you're linking it to Lorite and stuff like that, which is rightfully so. But Spirit Stone, like it just people said it, but it's never has been on the forefront. But now that it's banned, people are like, okay, yeah, no, I'm glad that was actually banned. It's I think universally from what I've seen, everyone's glad that it was banned. It's no reason for it to exist in a monocolor format, and at least until other colors get similar powers. There's no one is even close to this benefit level from a monocolor stone at this point in time.
For the record, I agree 100%. Like I said, the trade-off just isn't there, so it's 100% do it. You always play it. It's always what you do. But I noticed that a lot of people actually don't think Spirit Stone is the problem. It was, by the way. It definitely was the problem. But a lot of people seem to think that there's lots of really powerful green cards, and that's the reason green's the problem. They seem to think that Meditation was the problem, not the stone. I think the problem with the perception of this is that it seems balanced on the surface. It looks so innocent. It looks like this isn't a ridiculous power card, but let's take a look at the fact that stones have really, really basic abilities, because you always have them available to you, right? There's a 10 card, in most cases, maximum of what you can pull out of your deck. And if 4 of those are the same, your odds are ridiculously high of seeing that in the first few turns of the game, right? So when the stone has an advanced ability, like draw a card, that's a really, really big deal. Like, ridiculously so. And the comparison I draw is actually to Caster Chronicles, which used to be published by Force of Will, because in that game, it's the total opposite. If you're mana sources don't do anything besides make mana, then they're pretty garbage. Like, there's no reason to play them, right? But it's the style of Magic the Gathering where you have to draw into those and then play them. And that's a significant difference when you have that extra variance applied to your deck. And also, again, having only one of each specific caster. But that's why in a game like Force of Will, where you have ready access to those abilities, it's ridiculously powerful. Like, to the point it shaped the format, essentially.
Yeah, and and one thing also to point out that he said in here was that they also, part of the ban isn't just because of how it's been doing, but they are also doing it preemptively because of combos that are going to happen with the new set coming out, which means I don't know, I'm sure other people already know specifically, and obviously he knows from playtesting and stuff, but whatever, they're doing it preemptively for combos that were about to happen in the new set, that they're just preemptively stopping before those even more broken potentially combos come to the surface, which I like, because that's my biggest problem with Force Will and their bans and stuff like that has always been
when they're so conservative about it, like, oh, we'll wait a while, and then, hey, after Sherry's been wrecking the format for 2 formats, we'll finally ban her.
Yeah, they did the same thing with Reflect Refrain, then they did it with Fox, and then Prisha, and then Sherry.
I think Refrain, I'll give the benefit of the doubt, because honestly, they did a really big nerf to it initially, but it was pretty obvious after that happened and tournament results came out, it was still ridiculously overpowered. Whereas Prissia and Fox, I won't give them that benefit, because it was ridiculously obvious at them spoiling the cards that they were extremely powerful. And I think Fox got a free pass because initially it was really hard to use Fox. There weren't a lot of resonators that actually catered to playing it as well as doing advanced plays. Whereas with Demonic Dead and a couple other cards, it became incredibly clear that Fox was the best de facto deck, and Prissia would cut down anything else just with extreme swiftness and value. It was just really obvious to everyone, right? Whereas with Reflect Refrain, after the nerf, a lot of people thought it would still be fine. It wasn't, obviously, but I think that was their first big mistake in terms of ruler design versus actual regular cards. So that one I would give them the benefit, but definitely not the other two.
And definitely not Sherry. Definitely.
Like, how did that Sherry get by anyone?
There's no excuses for Sherry. And I still,
even I thought she was broken, but I didn't think everyone would play her initially, and I was actually apparently right. But as soon as the one tournament happened, everyone had her.
The only thing that restricted everyone from playing her was literally probably just price and access to her, because of how expensive and how that booster box worked for grabbing her. If that wasn't the case, I think it would have been even a higher percentage, because I did come across people at GPs who said that they weren't playing her because they just didn't have access to the ruler. And so I'd imagine that we'd even see higher percentages if the booster box worked differently, or if it was like how this one is, where we could just get in a starter deck at the front so everyone had the ruler pretty much. I think Sherry would have been even more widespread, which is something I don't think they took into account.
I don't remember. Was Time Spinning Witch one of the boxes we could pull one of the old rulers in it instead of the ruler?
Time Spinning Witch. That only ADK? Yes, Time Spinning Witch was.
I know you could get the Uber versions of old rulers, but I didn't remember if you could alternate artworks like they did with ADK. I don't remember. It's been a really long time since I've opened a Time Spinning Witch box, given the supply issue. I've opened ADK boxes, I've opened Ancient Knights boxes since then.
Yeah, so those sets meshed together for me as far as how they did the rulers, because it was just all over. But it was pretty cool. Our locals was able to get in a couple of the second print run of Time Spinning Witch the other week, so we got a couple boxes.
Oh, that's cool.
That was fun. And I pulled a Lumia also, or an Lumia Aimu. I was super excited about that. But yeah, so. Basically, I'm just glad that they preemptively did something. I think that's one of the first times they've preemptively done something, because it was strong, but I wouldn't say it was super broken yet. Although all that it would take for it to be broken is.
I would argue that it's the core of the green package. I think what most people have to argue about green is that quote unquote everything in green is broken, but the real reason that green is broken is it has this really powerful draw engine, and this draw engine can get you into all of the other tools that green has access to. Even blue, for example, most of its cards just cantrip for one. They replace themselves, essentially. So if I at any time I could snap my fingers in a blue deck and say, "Hey, I would like 3 more cards, please," you would probably value blue as a much better deck, right? So I think this takes a significant portion of the power away. Yes, Spirit Meditation's still a thing. You can still +2 off of playing it, but you have to invest 2 mana in doing so, and you're not plussing 3 off of it, right? Plus, it still takes up a slot in your rune deck, whereas, like I said, with the Spirit Stone, you could do it, use the Spirit Meditation, and then do it again if you just felt like it. You really needed the cards, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, and that's Spirit Meditation, and it is probably one of the big things, because it was a weird thing, I thought, to print Spirit Meditation knowing Spirit Stone was a thing. But like Jeff had said, it sounds like they design based on cluster and don't take into account the cluster that's still legal, which is kind of weird. So it could be they just overlooked it, but...
I mean, I know Jeff has been pushing them a lot more to focus on the bigger picture, but I think a lot of the carryovers are from the old design team, which I'm not really sure how to interpret, like in the video with Elf Investments that you covered in your TCG script.
Yeah, I heard that.
He mentioned the old design team, so I don't actually know if any retaining members, I don't know if there was any kind of big shift in the design team, if they cleaned it and replaced it, or if they're still old members, but I'm imagining that a good chunk of the old design team still exists, and some of their mindset is carried over where they keep the same old strategy of, we design for this cluster, we make a new cluster, we move on. I can see there is changes, like they do actually do throwbacks to older sets and stuff like that, but it's very minor changes. They're not extremely pronounced, right?
Yeah, and I remember hearing that in the alpha video too, and
such a big standout. The way
yeah.
he said it in the email.
I was like, because I could have sworn, because I feel like it's been mentioned before, and how the design team has been the same. And so when he said that, I was like, oh, so something about the design team changed. So I thought that was interesting. I'd be curious when that design, because they were talking in reference to Reflect Refrain, if I remember right. So somewhere between then and now, somewhere around, I don't know if it was exactly after Reflect Refrain, maybe it's with this new cluster or something like that. I'd be curious to find out when that happened, if is it the new members that created Sherry? That's what I want to know. That's the important question.
I think it was probably around the time frame of Time Spinning Witch, but the problem with set design, and we've been painfully aware of this, because a lot of time the companies acknowledge things, but they can't fix them because the sets are designed several months in advance, right? And that's not a force of will thing, that's a card game thing. In general, it takes a long time to print, design, test, and then send out for production and actually distribute the product. So, and you see this video games too. A lot of times, by the time you see something, it's already been 3 months in production, right?
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily their fault. But when they make a really big mistake, they can't just go back and correct it. Because unlike a video game, you can't just patch it, right? You have to live with the problem. And I think the biggest instance of that was with the misprints in Time Spinning Witch. It took such a long time to deal with those, and a lot of people still have misprinted rulers that just didn't ever get fixed.
Yeah.
So that's such an obvious example of the fact that they can't just snap their fingers and change things, even if they realize 3 months in advance that it's a problem. They're like, well, we've already sent it out to the printer. It's being produced. Are we going to throw away tens of thousands of dollars of product just to make a small fix? Probably not. We'll probably just have to run and gun and see what we can do, right? And again, they're not the only ones, but they're the most prominent example in recent history where they had to do this multiple times and say, hey, we can't really change a set after it's been printed, right?
Yeah, and it's and granted, with some of that stuff could be like, for example, with those rulers, you can't go back and change it, but there are better ways to remedy it or fix it than certain paths that were taken.
The ruler was probably a bad example because that's actually a printing problem specifically.
Yeah.
But there's, I think, the most memorable one that wasn't related to print I can remember is the Levitine. They had 2 versions they pushed on the site. One of them said you can discard itself from your hand to give a mana, and the other one didn't say that. But they had already made the first design, and they sent the second one in, and the second design was already in print by the time they had showed us the first design.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh yeah, that's not the right one, here's the right one, which obviously is still ridiculously broken because they ended up banning it, but even if we would have told them that on the spot, they would have been like, oh, it's actually already the printer, sorry.
Yeah. But, so, what are your thoughts on, so the big thing that we didn't see was Lorite. What are your thoughts on Lorite
Uh,
staying alive?
so it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the green package. I think not having ridiculous draw power, you still have reasonable draw power, but part of that is you can only pick up a card with Spirit Meditation and draw a card. So you would have already had to see and used Lorite to pick him up and use him a second time. So I think by reducing the overall power level of green in terms of digging into your deck, you allow more decks to see power and play, and you make it less likely that you'll see 4 Lorites in a game. I remember at the ARG in Florida, some dude commented, "I think you've Lorited me like 7 times," and I was like, "Yeah, it's actually been the same copy of Lorite for at least 3 of those times with Spirit Magics and using the Spirit Meditation and bouncing into my hand, I think with the Jupiter or something like that. Like there was a lot of random plays that let me keep reusing that same Lord over and over again. And no small part of that was the fact that I drew it with a Spirit Stone and then kept reusing it over and over again. So a lot of those games, if I didn't have a Spirit Stone, I just didn't see the Lord, and I probably would have lost those games, right? So I think he's not necessary to ban because Green's power level overall is a lot less. Again, not saying it's gone. You still have the same tools. It's just that the other decks have a lot more of a chance to catch up now.
Yeah, I'm curious if it's still. I mean, with Distortion of Time gone, you don't have the mandate of running Lorite in non-green decks now, which is nice because it was just if you don't run Lorite, you're going to get Distortion and lose the game when you inevitably go against a Time-Spinning Witch, and so you. And instead of a monocolor format, that doesn't work. You can't have counters to a deck, and that be the only counter to that deck in a certain color in a monocolor format. Like, that just doesn't work in a game. And so
yeah, it was kind of funny in an ironic way that Witch had access to all these color filter tools, so they were able to play all of the green cards that would stop them, as well as Kiza's Call and other things. It was a very nice twist of irony that they had access to every tool, including the green arsenal, while not being a green deck. And they, at the same time, no one was complaining about that. They were complaining about, wow, he skipped my turn. Not that he's playing 5 colors, but
yeah,
I guess they didn't really play yellow, but you get the idea.
yeah, well, and I can almost accept the playing multiple colors because, especially with Stranger of New Valhalla coming out, there's a decent amount of addition destruction and stuff like that. But the problem is, you're not going to spend that will for addition destruction because as soon as you do, your stuns are tapped down, you're going to get distortion, and then you're screwed. So like, there's nothing you could do about it. But like, I'm okay. Well, I say that now. We'll see. I'm okay right now with
the when you don't have a distortion in the format. Yeah, I get what you're saying. 100%.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, with the multicolor stuff and everything, could be cool, and that could be what ends up making Time Spinning Witch still relevant and unique without it being overpowered. Could be that access that other decks don't have. But now I can like when I make decks, I haven't yet, but like I'm obviously more so for fun. I'm making machine deck, and I'm super excited for the new set to make that machine deck. And I had forgot that. Oh wait, yeah, I gotta make room in here and in the stone deck for green and Lorites. Otherwise, and fair spells. Otherwise, I'm just gonna get Lorited to High Heaven or get Time Distorted. And with Time Distortion gone, Lorite's not going to be running every color deck. It's mostly going to be running green, so I only have to worry about Lorites when I'm going against green, and I can just side deck accordingly to help counter that. It's no longer just this, Severing Winds battle all over again, essentially, with every deck.
And honestly, I don't think the multicolor thing is a problem now that Distortion's gone, because now other decks actually can challenge Time Spinning Witch. Like, for example, decks like IU don't have to worry about not having like 4 turns where a ruler-based deck can't recover, because that was especially humiliating, I'm sure, in Ryan's feature match at Minnesota, because when you have a match dictated by flipping a ruler and attacking, and your ruler isn't able to untap for 3 turns sequentially, it paints a really bad picture for your deck in general. So if that same matchup had happened and there hadn't been a distortion of time, obviously it would have been very much in the favor of the IU player, right? Even with stones being able to be tapped by Mosasaur. So I think that's a really good example of how a small shift that makes the deck still viable but not oppressive might actually knock the entire deck out, despite it still being a good deck. Because, again, it was the win card versus the do very well, which is what the deck would do without it.
Well, and that's the other thing, though, with Distortion of Time. Like I had mentioned, I did like it because it's an alternate win type of scenario. However, Probably not the best type of alternate win scenario, especially for
I don't really see it as an alternative win because it's
an alternate play style, I should say.
I guess like basically it just tied into their overall strategy, which is stun you. Like you just don't do anything.
I thought it was a cool concept, but the problem, anything like this, silence. What was it called? The 2-cost green in Wanderer.
Law of Silence.
Law of Silence, stuff like that makes it so you just don't play the game is not good for card games, because if you lose, you're not happy because you're like, well, I didn't even get a chance to counter. I didn't. There's no chance for me to do like if you lose and you play it.
I'm fine with cancels, and I'm fine with like really strong lockout cards and like floodgates, etc. Like I know Yu-Gi-Oh has this problem where everyone had this huge negative connotation of floodgates, like they stop me from playing. It's like, well, they stop you from specific things, but you can still respond. It's actual skip the turns, which actually drive me nuts because I remember when Hearthstone made the expansion where they added the quest, I think it was Unguro, and then you had the quest mage who would just copy their makes your spell one cheaper, and then they would skip your turn and go again with Archmage and hit you for like 50 or 60 damage. And like, well, what was I gonna do? Just hope they don't draw it? Like, kill them faster? Like, there's just no way you can interact, especially in a game like that. Obviously, Force of Will is a lot better because you have ways to interact on your opponent's turn, but it just feels so bad. You're just staring at your opponent, being like,
"Well, you don't.
Are you done yet?" Like,
if you're
get a turn now?
If you have time distortion, you don't have ways to interact on your opponent's turn because you're still tapped out, so you don't even get a
right.
It's almost like skipping
exactly
2
what
turns.
I have a problem with. Yeah, like you're down a stone. Any attackers you have don't get to attack. Your ruler itself can't flip or attack or tap for a stone. Like basically, you're stunted for the entire turn. If you have one guy standing, maybe you can attack it or something. And it's essentially skipping your turn, which is what I hate so much about that kind of card.
Yeah, and it hurts more because it's not skip a turn. You're still taking your turn. So you have that sort of agonizing, like, draw a card, look down, you're like, right, I can't recover. You sort of look at your hand, you're like, and it's that sort of, like, demoralizing thing that's like, okay, well, you just don't leave that game happy or satisfied. You're not like, oh, I put up a fight because you didn't get to fight at all. If they kill you fast enough and stuff like that, or you barely fought and stuff like that. So it's
a feeling that cards like Mosasaurus don't let you feel because, yeah, sure, 3 or 2 of my stones are tapped, but I still have a way to fight back, right? I can play like a 1-drop, or maybe I have a stone with barrier, like the Speaking Stone. Like there are counter plays you can do that don't involve just having a Lorate, right?
Well, in Mosasaurus, you have multiple opportunities to stop it too. Time distortion, it's in there, and you can Lorate it. Is pretty much the only real way of stopping it. Mosasaurus, you have a chance to cancel Dinosaur Surfacing. You have a chance to Lorate or Erendite it when it enters the field. If it enters the field, it has to have 3 stones to target. Otherwise, it has to target its own stones as well. It's like there's so many factors that go into Mosasaurus, whereas Time Distortion is just like, this is happening. Do you have a Lorite? Yes. Well, I'm probably going to Lorite and Ferris Spell you anyway, so it doesn't matter. If you don't have a Lorite, this is happening. I feel like there's more interaction with Mosasaurus, and if it does get off, at least it's only hitting your stones at best. It's not hitting your Resonator, your J Ruler, and all that's in your additions, if that's relevant and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess
there's a couple additions. Yeah,
I've never actually thought about that, but yeah, you wouldn't recover your additions either, so they would also stay tapped.
Yeah. Which sucks for that, like, you have, like, that one addition, I know it's not used much, but the one addition that, like, you tap, remove a Resonator, then it untaps, you tap to bring it back into the field, like a blink, essentially, and that's a whole combo that you're missing out on, especially if they destroy that addition, because it gives them an extra turn, then that's going to be really depressing, because you're like, well, I'm the only guy running that addition, and I was going to show how cool it was.
And I guess what you mentioned earlier about the Spirit Stone actually makes a good discussion point, a good segue, because it's actually not banned in Wanderer, it's only in New Frontiers, which the trade-off comes back, and that's why it's a good point of discussion, because the trade-off is, like we said earlier, you are running it instead of a dual stone, so you're giving the trade-off of having access to multiple colors. But most of Wanderer currently is dominated by rune decks, so it'll be interesting to see if anyone actually plays Spirit Stone in Wanderer and uses this ridiculous draw engine, or if it's like what I think it is right now, and it's just too fast for you really to have to worry about that. And
Yeah,
part of that is they banned Gretel. That's the next card. But I don't really think that changes the format very much. Stops the really broken combos, like the ones that specifically involve Gretel.
yeah,
But it wander at all in a real
and well,
grand scheme of things. Are you still there?
yeah. I hear you're a little skippy for me. Can you hear me?
What was the last thing you heard me say?
I heard most of that up until the last bit of you don't know if Gretel affects it.
I don't think it changes anything that other than combos that actually specifically involve Gretel.
Yeah.
I think the format is almost exactly the same as before they did this list in Wander anyway. I mean, we get the new cards, but that doesn't, again, affect Wander so much because the card pool is so large. It takes a really big change to make a dent in the pool.
Yeah, and it what was it? Yeah, and unfortunately, Mike Rance couldn't come on. I feel like he sounded like he had some thoughts about it too, Gretel, and I'd be curious.
He'll
like,
have a good video, I'm sure.
as you mentioned, I'd be curious if what his thoughts are on Spirit Stone and Wander. Like you're just saying, if that's relevant or not. But yeah, the Gretel, except from what I was seeing in comments and stuff, people were like, okay, it's a good band, but like, there's some other stuff that's more big in Wander that is more deserving of a ban. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not too into Wander. When I am into Wander, it's like very localized stuff. It's not competitive at all. So I'm not too familiar with that scene. But
I used to be really into it with I'm sure you saw my game at Providence with those Otherworld Dreams and the Thought Control, but at the end of the day, I haven't played Wanderer either in like probably 4 months, so Mike definitely knows a lot better than me right now what's going on in Wanderer.
Yeah, no, but with the enter effect change, it's definitely a good ban in Wanderer, I'd assume. And people were pointing out like, or Mike had pointed out one thing where the rune that grabs a 0 cost, or for 0 cost, grabs a 2 cost or less human from the graveyard, so you put Gretel out in.
Stuff like that's pretty obvious that Gretel like influenced that, but there's just so many things that don't rely on Gretel, and yes, every deck that played at the ARG that Ryan and Aaron went to, they all played Gretel, and they all were green decks for the most part. I think there was 1 or 2 outliers, but I don't really think Gretel was the be-all, end-all. It was just something that they all happened to be able to have in common because it was really good. But if you notice, they weren't really playing the rune to reanimate it or anything, right? It just was a really good staple card.
Yeah.
And it being gone just slows green down a tiny little bit, but it, again, isn't the be-all, end-all, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious. We'll see how that goes. Is there any other cards you think they missed, or you think this was pretty good and we'll see how it goes?
I think people are actually more inclined to be upset about Seven Disciples still being a thing. I know at my locals anyway, that's been a really big topic of discussion is, yeah, Laura cancels an ability, but then you play the Seven Disciples afterward and then you switch sweeping games, right? But again, I think it's mostly the fact that it was this big green engine that lets you grab everything that you needed. And Disciples, honestly, isn't ridiculously oppressive as long as you are prepared to deal with him. And I think at the beginning, a lot of people really stressed out about him and didn't actually think of obligations. For example, a good example would be in Time Spinning Witch, Dragonlord's Breath could just bounce him back to the hand, right, for 1 mana. And he doesn't have barrier, it gains it from an ability on enter. So that's a really good answer. You just put him back in the hand and they wasted their turn for 1 mana.
Well, now I'll just point out, if you ban Lorite, then Lorite Seven Disciples isn't that good.
Yeah. Obviously, he only gets 1 ability, and obviously at that point he's fine because he gets either swiftness, precision, precision is target attack, flying, or +2/+2. It's not relevant. He would just be a 7/7 swiftness 90% of the time, right?
Yeah, and it at least because Seven Disciples is an interesting one because that was one that I personally thought was really strong, and a lot of people didn't think so. And now I think it was post rotation it started to make its thing. That was probably due to the monocolor format having just more green power cards is really strong. But it's like you're running Lorite. I know you're running Lorite. You know you're running Lorite. So why not run a 3-drop that gets almost every ability in the game? Like that's it seems pretty good.
I think a lot of people were misled by last format because last format the decks were just so good you didn't need it. And by last format, sorry, I should be specific. I was referring to rotation. The decks were just so good, regardless of whether they're monocolor or not, that you just did not need to run 7 Disciples. And since no one saw it in any deck, they're just like, well, this card is pretty lackluster, no one plays it, right? But again, what a lot of people don't really think about is that the reason people aren't playing it is because it doesn't fit in the metagame. It's not able to be played reasonably. It doesn't mean it's a bad card.
Yeah, no, and like I always point out on different stuff is like a lot of people tend to concentrate on like what are the top decks at GP? Oh, 7 Disciples is in there. Okay, that's not that great of a card and stuff like that. But it's very important to look at the local level and the just the level right above the local level. So somewhere around ARG, seasonal ARG things, like the Valentines and stuff like that. Those types of things. And in that arena, 7 Disciples is not only really strong, but I don't think it's at the level of, like, say, Time Distortion, but it does serve as
it's a very, very powerful card. I can definitely see where you're coming. Like I said, it's whatever.
Someone at their locals,
so much going on.
Some of the locals won't distinguish the power level between 7 Disciples and Time Distortion. To them, when both are played, they're going to have an equal reaction as far as what they can do to counter it. And so that's just always something to keep in mind as well, is that sort of mindset. And I think obviously they don't probably care about that, but I do think that is something to keep in mind. They should keep in mind when they're looking at bans, not necessarily that you should ban 7 Disciples or anything like that, but it should be like a consideration, at least at the design level. I'll take a step back at the design level, because we don't want to be banning cards that are not OP, but at the design level you should be like, okay, this skips someone's turn. That's going to deter people from playing the game. So let's
I think you hit the nail on
and
it basically comes down to 2 things. One is actual balance, which is what is actually broken, and Distortion Time was definitely there, and so is Spirit Stone. But the other is perception, how you feel as a player. So even though it might not actually be game breaking for you to play a Laureate 7 Disciple, it feels pretty crippling as a player when you're up by 2,000 life, and all of a sudden he plays this card, it hits me for 9, it first strikes my guy, it dies, he heals for 9, and he was flying with barrier, so I couldn't target him or block him. And then, provided he lives another turn, he does it again, heals another 9, I still can't deal with this card, because I have like a miscalc or something in my hand. Like, it's all the perception of the player, right? If I feel like that's an uninteractable card, I'm going to treat it like it is, and I'm going to have a very negative experience. So even though, like I said, for example, Dragonlord's Breath could deal with it for 1 mana, that's not something as a player I'm going to immediately think of it. I'm going to be like, wow, this card is actually totally bullshit. I'm not going to play against this. This is garbage. I'm just going to quit. It's whatever, right?
You know what's going to be an interesting case study is seeing design and bans. Well, I think there's only 1 ban, but the design and ban in Caster Chronicles, and then seeing how they design and ban going forward, so you can actually in real time see what influence Force of Will has over those type of decisions, and what, now that it's more so the core passionate people in charge of the game, how does that affect design? How does that affect bans? Is it just how card games are, or is this something unique to Force of Will as far as designing these sort of random crazy strong card? Because Caster Chronicles had that loop at the very beginning, but they actually banned it pretty quick.
I think the really big thing for casters is there's 7 colors, and when you have such a big variety to go from, and in all fairness, it's easier to play multiple colors in casters because only one of the colors needs to contribute toward the color identity.
Yeah.
It's still really hard to mix multiple different colors, and even when you do, there's so many different play styles and card archetypes that it makes it really difficult, especially as the card pool gets larger and larger, to have decks that are the same or have these ridiculous combos that are consistent, right? But like you pointed out, right in the first set, there was one card that actually was essentially Amaterasu's Foresight or Wabaku, where you weren't able to be attacked and dealt damage, and then you pick it up and play it again, and then the card that picks it up would bounce back to your hand, so you'd be able to do that. So you just built up lots and lots of mana, and then eventually just steamrolled your opponent while never taking any damage. I don't think we'll probably run into that obvious of a problem, but the main thing to note is that Caster doesn't have any competitive play, and that's a really big difference to distinguish, because games that have competitive play have a lot more publicized flaws. So Force of Will is played competitively, so everything that is meta or game breaking is highlighted on a much higher level. Whereas a game that's a lot smaller, like let's say Weiss Wars or Caster Chronicles or a game of that nature, where competitive play isn't really put on a high pedestal, they don't see as many highlights of the flaws they may or may not have.
I'd be curious, though, since now they're breaking off and this is sort of their child if they'll introduce competitive play or be more, actually be supportive of it outside of Japan and stuff. Would be cool to see.
It'll be really interesting to see how they come about it, because I've actually never even heard of a game breaking off from its publisher and just self-publishing.
Yeah, I thought that was super. I was like, what? Like, just from a business standpoint, how did that even come about? Like, how does someone who's in Design a Caster go up to Force of Will and they're like, yeah, we're leaving. Well, we're going to go in the building over. So if you could sign this piece of paper giving all the rights to us, we'll be out of your hair.
I know it was a mutual thing, and from what I understand, they were technically a separate company to start, but they had a mutual agreement and they kind of merged together. So again, I don't work for either company. I have no idea how the internals work, just like you don't have any ideas.
Yeah.
I think I saw the director or the producer for Caster Chronicles at Worlds. He has a really crazy hairdo. I don't know if that was him or someone who also just coincidentally looked like him and worked for Force of Will, because that was probably the biggest example of how the companies were the same but so ridiculously different, because without any kind of advertising or warning, they just happened to have two artists from Caster Chronicles at the event who were doing signings, and I think the producer was there kind of highlighting and seeing what kind of interest they got, but there was not ever any indication that anything involving Caster Chronicles was going to be at Worlds. And then you drop in, and there's these two people in the corner signing these really awesome art styles, and the director is there. So again, I don't really know what the deal with that was, but it kind of highlighted that the communication between them, even internally, didn't really seem like it was rock solid. It seemed like there was a really big break there.
Yeah. All right. Before we get too sidetracked, we'll wind this video down. Then.
Yeah. I think we're getting a little off topic, and it's fair because we're obviously pretty passionate about both games, but I think it's time to really wrap this up.
Yeah, so thanks guys for watching, especially if you watched the whole video. We're watching for bands in the state for casters. That'd be interesting. Let us know if you did. And hopefully Mike Rance will do a Wander discussion for the Wanderer band. And
we've got a pretty sick plan for him to do a video on that, so I'm hoping he does a huge video on that himself, because that'll be interesting.
Yeah. All right, see you guys next time.
See ya.